Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about essentially what you would call stay or pay agreements. So you see these come up when an employer might be offering someone training, specialized type of training, some type of benefit like that, and then saying, hey, if you don't stay for a certain period of time, you're going to have to repay what we put out. Sometimes you do it with tuition reimbursement as well, different types of things. So what are some things that employers should consider, Russell, when they're using these types of agreements with their employees?
Yeah, so I think previously, and it's probably been a while now, we did an episode here where we talked about non-competes and how disfavored they are, and how courts and the FTC and the NLRB are all looking at ways to limit or extinguish non-competes. And one of the things we suggest is using these types of agreements to create some stickiness with employees and mitigate the risk of employees, who are flight risk. And I think for those same reasons, I think, once all these government actors, go as far as they're going to be able to go with respect to non-competes, these types of agreements are going to be more in the crosshairs as well. I do think these are good tools, and obviously there's, the more benign version of it is the tuition reimbursement. I'm going to pay to put you in these classes, and they'll help benefit you and me as the employer. But you got to stay here. I'm not going to pay your tuition and then have you leave, as soon as the course ends. So, having some kind of sliding scale of repayment based on length of time from the end of the course, I think is generally a good idea and is, generally going to be enforceable still. Um, but where some of the literature that's out there now is starting to look at it from the standpoint of, well, some amorphous training that can't be quantified, and well, you got to pay $15,000 back to us to leave our employment. And those are the kinds of things that I think are going to be hard to enforce. I think courts are going to look at them and say, why is this person paying this money back? What is this about? And those are going to be really challenging. So one of the important things to at least enhance enforceability is to tie that repayment obligation to actual out-of-pocket costs of the employer.
Yeah, and it really comes back to some of the things that, the FTC, for instance, is considering as it relates to non-competes, which is the restrictions on employee mobility and the ability to move from job to job. And the example that you gave, Russell, is a good one, where it's like if it's $15,000, let's say, that could be a lot for a lot of employees, depending on what their income level is. And so that might be something that does end up acting as a de facto non-compete because they can't come up with that money, or how they, and they're it's put in there to try to discourage people from leaving, right? And at its base level, employers don't want to have to shell out a bunch of money and then the employee leave the next day. That's really kind of where it all comes from. But depending on what the terms are and how long that's spread out, like how long does the employee need to stay, for them to still have to repay that money, or are you going to have them repay the full amount even if they stay for, like, let's say it's a 2-year period that they need to stay, or a year, or whatever it might be, and then they leave a day before that, right? Has it been prorated? Or, those are some things to consider, both just from a practical perspective as well, about what employees are willing to sign on to, and just kind of things, practical considerations as well. But you can see how that could really deter someone, which is the point, but you do have to be careful when making those decisions.
Yeah, I mean that deterrence is a lot more effective when it's tied to, tuition reimbursement, course training, licensing expenses fronted by the employer. Again, things where the employer could walk into court and say, "Hey, here's the receipt for what I paid for this person. And if I had known this person was only going to be here a month, I wouldn't have paid for it." Which is why I put this agreement in place to ensure that they'd be here for the requisite amount of time to make me feel good about making this investment in them. And then, they left, and whether it's a scaled thing or a cliff, um, we pay this money, we didn't get what we bargained for in exchange for it, so therefore I should be reimbursed this money. Much better argument than, well, I invested a lot, I had manager time, I had this or that, and this is what I think it's all worth. That's going to be a lot harder to enforce.
Yeah. And also something to consider just in general when you're looking at these types of agreements is we're talking about kind of specialized training, tuition, these types of categories. Exactly to your point, Russell, well, my manager taught him how to use the software, and that cost amount of time. I mean, those are not the types of things we're talking about. And it can vary by industry and by, what the job is, kind of what these things might be. I've had clients who, they have like specialty schools that they could send someone to like really get them these very specialized set of skills, but they don't necessarily need them for their job. It's actually also a benefit for that employee. If they leave, they can take those skills on the road. So, something else to kind of consider when we're looking at that these are looked at differently. The training someone to use the software they need to do their job is not the same thing as tuition reimbursement, for instance. Well, thanks, Russell, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.